So maybe take me through some of the things you experienced, and then if you've got it, do you have any advice for other women attorneys out there on, how to handle it, how to deal with it, or how to overcome it?
Sure. So one of my goals is to encourage other women to become leaders either in their current firms or to start their own practices. So we know that women are graduating from law school in larger numbers than men, and they have been doing so for the last decade. And yet about 25 to 28% of law firm owners are female. So that doesn't make any sense. Those numbers don't add up. So what is going on? People assume that it's about childcare issues, but the data suggests that is really a very small reason that keeps women in leadership positions.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins, and this is a podcast where we get to interview law firm founders that bring a lot of different perspectives to the practice of law. And today we have one of those founders, and I'm really excited about this episode. I got to see this person give a talk, I don't know, a few months ago now, that I thought really was a good perspective on the practice of law, and I want to dive into that today. So today we've got Laura Noble from The Noble Law, which is a plaintiff employment law firm based in North Carolina, but that's not just where they practice. So welcome to the show, Laura. Why don't you sort of introduce yourself, short intro, and tell us exactly where your firm is. I know you've got multiple offices, so tell us about that.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you as well. So our firm originated in North Carolina. We're in Raleigh and Winston-Salem and Charlotte, and we've expanded to Charleston, South Carolina. And I am licensed to practice in New York, so we still have some presence there. And we have two attorneys who also are licensed to practice in the DC area.
You're licensed in South Carolina?
I am not, but
Okay.
One of my lawyers is, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because my understanding is pretty hard. You got to check a lot of boxes down there. So I get that. So part of your talk that I mentioned, you sort of gave a little bit about your background, and I want to dive into that because I think it's a really interesting story. I think could be very impactful for a lot of folks. So you started out in the big city, right? New York, and you were a prosecutor, right?
That's right. So really my interest in law school was focused on social justice issues. I did some anti-death penalty work, which brought me into the criminal realm. And I had a very influential professor who introduced me to that line of work. And I applied to work at Legal Aid in New York, but they had a hiring freeze. But the prosecutor's office did not. And I was concerned about that. And he convinced me that you can do good on the prosecutor's side and actually have a lot of power and authority to determine the outcome of these cases and can be very impactful on victims and the like. So I thankfully listened to his advice and took the job because it was one of the best positions I've ever had still to this day. I was in the Brooklyn DA's office and it was immediately thrown into the fire. I was in court from day one. And it was quite challenging, and I'm very thankful that I had that experience.
So you were attracted to social justice. Did you always want to be a trial lawyer too?
I always wanted to be a lawyer, and I don't know when or why. Just it's so cliche, but I don't have any memory of wanting to do anything else. I wanted to be a lawyer from the time I was 10 years old. I was in advocacy groups in high school. I was a student lawyer in college. I knew that that was my calling and that's what I wanted to do. And by the way, I'm still a lawyer who will never tell a lawyer joke. I have such enormous respect for attorneys. I think they do incredible work. The fact that we have a pro bono commitment where we give of our time voluntarily, and I know most attorneys go into the profession because they want to help people. So I excuse the pun, but I do think it's a noble profession.
That's a great name, by the way, for a firm. You got lucky there.
I did, and maybe that was part of it. I read somewhere once that somebody's last name actually does influence their outcome. So if your name is James Smiley, you're likely to be a dentist. So who knows? Maybe it was destiny.
That's funny. I was talking to somebody the other day that their last name was Law. So it's like, it's the law firm,
There you go.
or is it just the law firm? Yeah. So you started out in the prosecutor's office. How long did you do that? And then eventually you did pivot out of there, and sort of take us through sort of the progression and maybe why you decided to leave.
I was in the Brooklyn DA's office for about 3.5 years, and I feel like I had 10 years worth of trial experience when I left. But especially given today, where it's so hard for new attorneys to get any courtroom experience, let alone trial experience. So it was intense. I saw sort of the worst of humanity. And even when I had a win, it didn't feel great, right? Because you would often have family members in the courtroom and people crying as their family members taken away to jail, justifiably so. It didn't feel like this is where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. I didn't feel like I was doing enough to move in the way that I wanted to move. So I left, and the natural progression out of the DA's office is to go to a large, well-established litigation firm, which I did in New York, and so moved to the civil side. The firm was comprised of former U.S. attorneys, so I thought, okay, these are my people. But I didn't realize that it was defense firm for management, right? Mostly. And we did actually do a couple of employment law cases, and I found myself on the side of the V that I did not enjoy, right? So we had some sexual harassment cases, we had some discrimination cases, and I just didn't feel like it was the right fit for me. And it was also excruciatingly boring, I'm not going to lie. I mean, going from riding around in a police car and jumping out at crime scenes and pulling bullets out of the wall to a windowless room full of files, it was a very tough transition.
And what about, I assume you guys billed hourly. What was that like coming from a non-hourly, just government, you don't have to worry about all that, to then all of a sudden you got a bill? And in New York, I imagine you got to really bill probably, right?
Very long hours, although the hours didn't bother me because we had long hours at the DA's office. Yeah, the billing was onerous, and particularly because I didn't care for the work. And I didn't realize what a luxury it is to like the kind of law that you're practicing and like the causes that you're advocating for. It really is a luxury, which is why I love what I do now. So I didn't last long there. I think I was there less than a year. And I tell this to new lawyers a lot. I wasn't a particularly good lawyer while I was there, I'll be honest, because I hated the work. I hated my clients. I didn't feel aligned with what we were doing. And so I wasn't particularly great at it. So I left and went to a nonprofit, a large nonprofit at Covenant House, New York, where I put together a lot of, again, what I do today. So I put together their kind of internal law firm where we provided services to the homeless and runaway young adults who were there. And we worked with a lot of pro bono attorneys. That I also did a lot of advocacy, research and writing on public policy issues while I was there.
It's I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I feel like, and just my personal experience and talking to a lot of attorneys over the years, that it seems like every attorney sort of goes through this phase. I say many attorneys go through this phase fairly early in their career where they're like, man, I hate what I'm doing. What do I do? And then, it's like, should I quit practicing law? Do I hate being a lawyer? Is it the firm? Is it the kind of work? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like maybe you sort of went through that and you decided to leave. So take me through sort of, maybe what took you to the nonprofit versus going to another law firm or trying something else.
It really was a misalignment of values at the civil litigation firm. And I looked around at the other firms that were doing the same kind of work and thought, well, that's not going to provide any better alternative to where I am right now. So let's go back to either government or nonprofit or work that was really value focused for me. And that's why the Covenant House was such a good fit. Unfortunately, it was in the late 90s, and I had the audacity to get pregnant, and they had not had someone in sort of leadership get pregnant and have a baby before. And they really did not know what to do with me in that capacity. So I wanted to work at home one day a week, which is hilarious now, right? I mean, new
Yeah.
lawyers, our Gen Z lawyers will be horrified at this, but I wanted to work at home one day a week. I had a full-time nanny because I wanted to be with my newborn. And it wasn't, I was just research and writing, half of my time. And they said, no, I could absolutely not do that. I had to be at work every single day. And it was not a 9 to 5. It was more of a, 8 to 7 kind of job. And I made the decision that I wanted to be a new mom, and more than I wanted to be a practicing lawyer. So I left that job. I loved that job, but I left that job, and I stayed home 7 more years and had 2 more children.
It is kind of crazy to think about nowadays how foreign that idea was back then. I mean, just one day a week. And, as I think about it, I remember, years ago, and we can talk about this too, I'm sure you'll agree, but there's this huge talent pool that leads to law. And at least the way it used to be set up, they were not set up to tap into that talent pool. And I'm talking about women who, top of their class, all the credentials, all that stuff, that have kids or decide they want to work less or whatever. And you're just like not tapping into that. And it's just always seemed to me back then that is insane that they're not trying to figure that out. I guess nowadays maybe it's a little better. I don't know. What's your perspective?
I absolutely agree. And it's interesting when I look back on my experience and how I got to my own firm, because sometimes I think that this is just such a fluke how I got here and how I started a firm. And yet when I talk about it and I look back, each of those experiences really shaped me in profound ways and sort of led me to do what I'm doing right now. The idea of a place that aligned with my values, a place that allows for women and folks that maybe are not in the mainstream of the practice of law to practice law, a way to do it remotely, a way to balance work and family in a real meaningful way, not in just we say it for the marketing purposes way. All of those things really shaped how I came to develop my firm.
So, and maybe I'll ask sort of probably a series of questions and you can wrap it up in your answer. But so obviously you were in New York and now you're in North Carolina. So part of your journey is you ended up in North Carolina. You took 7 years off at least from practicing law, which, that is not uncommon. Folks do that. And so, but it is not always easy to get back into the practice of law after you've taken the time off. So maybe take us through that journey, and then I'll start with, did you always think you were going to start a law firm, or is part of your journey down in North Carolina part of the genesis or the impetus of forming your firm? Hey, tell us all about that. There's a lot there, so just unpack it.
No, I never thought I was going to start a law firm. And sometimes I wonder, there's that old cliche that the people who don't want to be leaders are the one who should be leaders. And maybe that's true. I'm not sure yet. I'm still playing that one out. But I came to North Carolina with my family. We relocated. We had moved around a bit. We relocated to North Carolina for all the reasons I love North Carolina. Great weather, great culture, great people, a good education system, all of that, and really immediately fell in love with it. And so by the time all my kids were in school, I wanted to go back to work. I wanted to contribute. So I sat for the bar, which was quite a humbling experience in my 40s, and passed. And then really thought I would just sort of be a research and writer for somebody, be, a part-time, individual contributor to a larger firm doing some work that I like. So, marched out into the workforce with my resume in hand and tried to get someone to hire me, and no one would hire me. I had a very weird background. There was no straight line. I couldn't say, look at me, I'm a real estate attorney yet, or a criminal attorney, or I just didn't have any experience that made sense, A to Z. Although I thought, I brought sort of a host of abilities and experiences to the table. No one else agreed. And so I was very discouraged, and someone suggested go to the law library, we still have those, and sit down and look at all the areas of law and pick one and decide which one you want to do, and then get really good at that, and then go out and, market yourself as that person, and then somebody will hire you to write some briefs. I said, okay. So I did that, and I literally did that, went to the law library and had a giant, encyclopedia of law in front of me. And I was immediately attracted to employment law. My personal experience of having a newborn in the workplace, being a new mom, every female attorney can give you instances of sexual harassment or gender discrimination. I'm an entrepreneur. My parents are entrepreneurs. I liked the intersection of sort of individual clients and their journey and their struggles and business, and I thought that I could make an impact. So that's the law that I chose.
It's funny. You talk to a lot of people, and I get this question too, and they're sort of like, how did you end up where you were? And looking forward, you don't necessarily see it coming, but when you look back, as you just sort of referenced, there is sort of a direct line. It all makes sense as you look back, maybe, your personal experience, you've had, some of the employment experience doing the work, you didn't know which side you wanted to be on, you've got sort of the helping people element, you got all those things. So the other thing that's interesting, like for my practice area, people ask me, similar story. I mean, I was doing what I was doing, but I basically went and decided this was interesting to me, and I just went and learned it. I mean, I just self-taught, and it was a lot of work. And so I admire that. I recognize that. I had to do it too. So you choose employment law, you dive in, you start learning it. Is the intent still maybe you're going to go help another firm, or was it at this point you're like, I'm starting my own firm?
I will say, I think we're very fortunate in the sense that we got to pick. So many lawyers who are unhappy, I think, are the ones who go to that first clerkship, then the money's really good, and then they think, well, I'll just stay here and pay off my school loans, and then 15 years later they're an IP attorney and they can't explain why, and they're miserable, right? So I always encourage attorneys to get a variety of experiences and really find the thing that speaks to you, because again, you're not going to excel at it if you don't enjoy it. It's my personal theory. So I again thought that I was teaching myself, but I knew that I was not going to be able to be the kind of lawyer I wanted to be without a mentor. So I engaged in a series of, meet and greets with folks, took them out for coffee, et cetera, and looked up sort of super lawyers in North Carolina and made an effort to reach out to them and go and meet with them. And I met a woman who was very well known in her field, one of the best plaintiffs employment lawyers in North Carolina. And I called her and introduced myself and said, do you, I'd love to take you out for a coffee and, hear about your experience and see, how you got to where you are today. And she said, I'm not really a coffee drinker. I'm more of a drink drinker. And I said, sure, that works too. So I took her out for some drinks. And by the end of the night, I said, I need to come work for you. And she said, I'm not hiring. And I said, I don't care. I really need to come work for you. And so as she describes it, I showed up in a little basket on her doorstep, but I really did just march into her office and say, don't mind me. I'm not here. I'm just going to watch. And, put all ego aside. I knew nothing about the workplace. I was so technologically disadvantaged. Again, I had missed it. I had been home raising babies. So she sent me a calendar invite and it popped up, on my Outlook or whatever. And I thought, that is so cool. How do you do that? And I literally called her, like, how do you do that? It's so embarrassing now, but I was just clueless. She was very kind, and she literally let me come in and sit on her couch and watch her work. And so I did that for a month. And then I worked on a matter with her, never asked her for money, never asked her to pay me. She kept saying, I'm not hiring you. I said, it's fine. I don't care. And then I started working on a case with her. She's a very fair and kind person, and said, okay, we resolve the matter. Here's your fee. So then I used that fee to rent an office next to her. Well, first I started in a table in the hallway because I couldn't afford the office. So then I worked on another matter, and then eventually was able to rent an office next to her. So it was just me in a little office next to her. And that is how I started getting cases from the cases that she didn't really want to do, that were too small for her. And then after a few months of doing those cases, I realized I needed help. And so I started hiring.
That's awesome. So many little lessons there that I think, younger lawyers need to I just want to pick out. So, the first one is, sort of the gift we had to be able to sort of pursue practice, and one element of that for me is, watch out for the golden handcuffs. Live beneath your means. You do not spend everything you make, because you limit your options in the future. So that's the thing I'd point out there. But the other thing, you moved to North Carolina. I presume you didn't really know anybody. You didn't go
Not
to
a
law school
soul.
there. You didn't know any lawyers. And that is a huge disadvantage. I mean, compared to the people that grew up there, went to law school there, been working there.
It is and it isn't. I will tell you, I was too stupid to be afraid, and that helped, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
lot in North Carolina of, do you know who my daddy is? And I
Oh, yeah.
didn't. So I just kept suing people. So there, it wasn't.
Yeah, well, that's good. But the other thing is, I mean, you made it happen. You went out and just started calling lawyers. I mean, I tell a lot of young lawyers to do that. Even if you know people, make efforts to, systematically continue to meet new lawyers. Just build your network, build your relationships. Number one, it's good for your business, but also it's just good for your health. I mean, it's a lot more fun when you are friends with people you work with, right?
Absolutely. And even the new lawyers that end up joining our firm, they all come through the firm as law clerks. And it's hard to get our attention even to hire a law clerk. And so, the process of perseverance and, continued engagement and showing up again and again and again and again, it does forge the path for you to then eventually join the firm. I mean, I said for years, I don't hire lawyers right out of law school. I just don't do it. I don't have time to train you. They're worthless to me. They don't know anything. I'm not doing it. And the first one I hired, she was just one brilliant, but so persistent, would not give up on us, and eventually changed my mind. And now we do hire lawyers right out of law school.
Love that. Love that. So the other thing I don't think you mentioned was, I mean, you still had your kids were in school, but they were I mean, they weren't out of the house, right? And
No.
so what was that like managing both of those?
Well, again, back to the things that influenced me that led to the creation of the type of law firm that I have. So once I started hiring, I realized that I was starting a firm, which was terrifying. But I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, and it looks like I need to do this because the work was coming in, and I couldn't do it alone. I want it to be a different kind of firm than the ones I experienced. And I wanted it to be a different kind of workplace than the ones I had experienced. So I was very deliberate about it being a place where working parents could survive and thrive, which meant that we had to have technology so that our folks could work remotely. So I started remote work, in the early 2000s, well before the pandemic. And I knew that technology was going to be the key driver of being able to do that. So I invested heavily in that education and that cost, and immediately put everything on the cloud. We were paperless from day one, and there was never a requirement that anybody had to, live near enough to the office that they had to be there every day. No one ever was, because I needed to be able to take a kid to soccer practice and go to a school meeting and be able to access my files in the car while I was waiting for the kid to come out of, for the pickup line. And then that's how we developed the firm.
That's funny. You came in sort of behind the curve on technology, and then you blew past every other law firm. I mean, early 2000s in the cloud remote. That's like space age for law firms back then.
And people thought I was nuts. I was doing remote depositions with a new company in like 2010, 2012, and would have arguments all the time with opposing counsel on how unethical it was and how could I possibly do that. And I was violating bar rules. We would have to go to the court. I'd have to file motions. And now I can't get a human to come into my law firm to do a deposition with me.
That is hilarious. Yeah. So, the other thing too, that you're sort of, just hearing you talk sort of at the forefront, maybe not everybody, but a lot of folks nowadays are talking about culture and building the firm and all this stuff. But you were way ahead of the curve on that too, it sounds like. And that was part of your talk. And I want to, again, based on some of your experiences, maybe talk me through sort of as you deliberately built your firm and the culture, what were some of the things that you wanted to make sure your firm did that maybe others didn't?
Right. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about the things I did wrong as much as the things that I did right. And I will tell you, the first 5, 6 years of the firm was about survival. It was about getting clients, getting help, figuring out how to be an employment lawyer, figuring out I didn't know the rules of civil procedure for North Carolina. I mean, I was a baby lawyer in essence, even though I was in my mid 40s. So that was just scrambling to catch up to where everybody else was. And I made some mistakes. I engaged with some people who were not the right fit for the firm. I did not have a good vetting process. I did not have a cultural scaffolding in place, and it showed. So by the time I was really deliberate about, what I wanted the firm to look like, or I had the luxury of some financial security that I could start thinking about those things. I engaged an executive coach and did a bunch of workshops and trainings on culture and leadership. And we spent a weekend with everyone who was with the firm at that point, the lawyers, the paralegals, the legal assistants, intake folks, and said, okay, who are we? What is our mission, vision, and values? And everyone participated. We split up in groups. We had long debates back and forth. And we ultimately came up with, sort of our operating principles. And that became a core, guidepost for how we do business.
Maybe name a couple of things that are important to your firm. And the other thing about values, have they sort of been tweaked over the years, or is it once you nailed them, you nailed them?
It's kind of been once we've nailed them, we've nailed them. And so collaboration, leadership, empathy, immediately leaps to mind. Equity, inclusion, diversity. That's always been part of our values. I mean, we're a law firm that represents individuals who believe they've been mistreated at work, discriminated against, harassed, wrongfully terminated. That's a big bulk of what we do, in addition to breach of contract, non-compete, wage and hour violations, and the like. But that was a guiding principle for me. Again, having experienced what I experienced, I knew that I wanted our culture to be unabashedly inclusive and encouraging of a diverse group of people who may have not had an experience of feeling like they belong at other law firms.
So it sounds like you, like everybody early on, you make mistakes, and that sort of helps put you on the right path to sort of get where you're going to get. And then so you have these values. It helps you create a lens to operate your firm and maybe how you treat your employees, treat your clients. I'm interested to hear also how it has affected or helped or whatever in terms of recruiting, because we'll get to this in a minute, but obviously it's not just you at the firm anymore. So
Right.
you want to make sure you recruit in people that are in line with those values. So how do you incorporate those in sort of the recruiting process?
That's a great question. Again, one of my pieces of advice would be to spend a lot of time thinking about your recruitment and vetting process, which I didn't early on because I just needed bodies. I needed was in desperate need for help, and that was a mistake because I found that there were some folks who were perfectly good lawyers, but just did not share our cultural values, and that will blow up a place quicker than anything you can imagine. So now we talk about, well, we send them a bio of the firm, a copy of what our values are and examples of them. We do a initial interview with our HR person, and then we open it up, and so that it's an interview with me, it's an interview with lawyers, it's an interview with the legal team that's going to work with them, the paralegals and the legal assistants. And ultimately it's a no diva policy. So if we have someone who has attitude, has some superiority complex, has a I say jump, you say how high management style, that is not going to work for us. And I don't care how brilliant you are, that's just not going to work in our culture.
And so I know that you're largely virtual. Are you only virtual? Do you have offices? I mean, do people have a place to come in if they want?
It's funny because as much as I love the flexibility of remote work, I'm also kind of very much a place. I like to have places where people can gather. And, my home and my office, I spend a lot of time trying to make it reflective of who we are and that it feels welcoming. So yes, we have our main office is in Raleigh. It's new, actually. We just moved in about a year and a half ago. We were in Chapel Hill before that. And then we have brick and mortar in Winston-Salem and Charlotte and Charleston. Yeah, that's it for now. But yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute too. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. I was looking at your website, and something cool on your website that I've not seen on any other law firm website is you have a page for pets, which I thought was really cool. So, tell me about that. What was the inspiration for that? And, is that, are you bringing the pets into the office, or tell me about it?
Well, we brought pets into the old office because I owned the building, which is not the case now in Raleigh. Again, it is the idea that, and this is an overused sentiment, but there is a piece that's really valuable, which is to bring your whole self to work, right? So when I was a working mom with school-age children, I didn't want to separate that out from the work that I was doing. There was no way that I could say to someone, I'm not going to be around from 3 to 5 because I am going to go see my daughter's, a school play or her practice or whatever. So, and I wasn't going to be embarrassed or ashamed about that either. Like, that was part of who I was. That's what the whole me bringing to the table. And that, I think, brings value to my ability to empathize with people who find themselves in difficult workplaces. So, the idea about the pets is this is a really significant part of people's lives, and it's a fun part, and it just gives people instant joy. Of course, children do too, but children can be complicated, and pets are just easy and lovely, and everyone has fun with it. So, yeah,
Yeah,
we
a
came up with
dog's
that.
always happy to see you when you come home. It's not always the case with the kids, right?
Right.
So I imagine you get a good response from clients, but has it helped, or do you get comments about it from clients that are looking at your website?
Surprisingly, not as much for that. I used to have a video, I don't think it's still on the website, of me. I'm a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I used to have a video of me
Nice.
in a fight. I mean, managed at the dojang, and people loved that video for some reason. I think it's one of the, I'll fight for you kind of lawyer, and I was literally kicking someone, so they thought that was funny. I used to get a lot of good feedback on that one. I don't think it's up
Nice.
anymore though.
You gotta bring that back. Put it on your YouTube channel. So you've sort of talked about this a little bit, but on your website, you're the largest female-owned, sort of plaintiff or employment law firm in North Carolina, and maybe South Carolina too. I don't know. So
we're not the largest in South Carolina, but we are the
Okay.
largest plaintiff's employment firm in North Carolina.
So tell me, my sense is that it's a fairly conservative jurisdiction in the federal, at least the federal. But I know here in Georgia, 11th Circuit's known to be pretty conservative, but I think maybe your circuit's even more conservative. I don't know. What's that been like?
So very challenging, and yet I think has worked to our advantage in this sense that when I started the firm, the conventional wisdom was you can't make any money as a plaintiff's employment firm in North Carolina. It's too conservative. The laws are too poor for workers, and you can scrape by, but you're never going to have a real firm. You're never going to be profitable. And that was just sort of throwing down the gauntlet for me to say, I think you're wrong. I think we can. And well, no one's tried it before, so let's do it. So we were able to sort of see a niche and create a niche. And, using the technology so that we could be fast and furious against our big firm counterparts has really helped us. And being critical thinkers about the kind of cases that we take, and then following the systems that I put in place for how we deal with cases made us very efficient. And so those combinations, I think, led us to, knock on wood, being successful.
And maybe that outsider mentality probably helped too, because like, screw y'all, I'm going to show you.
I was too stupid to know what I should be afraid of. So,
Yeah. So shifting a little bit, this is back to your story and your history, and I think this is something you mentioned in your talk that I saw. And this is, I think, a common experience for female lawyers that I think, especially old school male lawyers, don't understand, and that is, being misidentified or not identified as a lawyer. So maybe take me through some of the things you experienced, and then if you've got it, do you have any advice for other women attorneys out there on, how to handle it, how to deal with it, or how to overcome it?
sure. So, one of my goals is to encourage other women to become leaders either in their current firms or to start their own practices. So we know that women are graduating from law school in larger numbers than men, and they have been doing so for the last decade. And yet, about 25 to 28% of law firm owners are female. So that doesn't make any sense. Those numbers don't add up. So, what is going on? People assume that it's about childcare issues, but the data suggests that that is really a very small reason that keeps women in leadership positions. And the larger barrier is a cultural one, which is that most women, not all, but most women work from a leadership style that is collaborative, empathetic, tries to, again, to sort of bring your authentic self, work with others, try to achieve a consensus building towards decision making. But most law firms, having been created at the time where women were excluded from the law, tend to be focused on more of an individualist kind of agentic approach, which most men, not all, adopt, which is the one in charge, I'm the individual, I'm aggressive, which goes in line with a lot of what we know about trial lawyers, right? But that doesn't work as a leadership philosophy for most women. So they feel like they have to put on a jacket of a different personality when they walk into a firm, and they have to be some, hard ass litigator, tough guy, and, knock everybody down and stomp on them to climb to the top. And it feels fake. And again, my working theory is you don't do your best work if you don't feel aligned, if you feel fake, if you're, getting, just trying to get along to get ahead, it doesn't bring out the best in you. And so I wanted to create a firm where we cultivated that experience so that we could nurture and grow more female lawyers
You
into
know,
leadership positions.
and this sort of circles back to the recruiting, I imagine, and the culture, all the stuff. Now that you've sort of built this firm that really you couldn't find anywhere else, it repels the people that don't buy in, but it also attracts the people that want what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
has that helped? I mean, I'm sure you broadcast. I mean, we're talking about it now, but you broadcast, hey, this is who we are. This is who we are. It probably helps you, I would think, in the recruiting nowadays. You talked about earlier, you just needed bodies and you didn't care. Well, now sort of you've got a track record and sort of a message that hopefully attracts the right people. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. It's been remarkable, the number of people that reach out to us, and so rewarding. We've had so many intake specialists, law clerks, legal assistants, paralegals come through the firm who then move on for, a variety of reasons, who come back. And, many of them have then gone on to law school and become really outstanding lawyers, or, involved in different careers. And they say, you created a model workplace. Not everyone, I'm sure you could find people who say we were horrible, right? I mean, that we're not the right fit for everybody, but that was the goal, right? So as part of our values, vision, mission, we established the triple bottom line, which is we do have to have a financial goal, right? We're not a nonprofit, and we have to be mindful of doing well for our clients, doing well for the people who work for us. We have a client goal. Obviously, we want to try to be as successful as we can in our clients achieving a goal, but we also have a social impact goal. And that can be through appellate work. That could be through, raising awareness by taking on interesting outside of the box cases, or it could just be advocacy or pro bono work, or, getting involved in collaborating with other firms, all of which we've done. And we're not done yet. My partners and I have lots of goals, lots of things that we want to do and accomplish, but we've been at it for about 16 and a half years. So, we're able to look back at a pretty decent body of work where we've met those triple bottom line goals.
I like that triple bottom line. I've never heard that before. I like that. So we've talked a lot about sort of the firm. You've grown it from, the table in the hallway to what it is now. So tell us how many attorneys you have. I think you've got 4 at least offices. Sort of tell us some of the stats.
Right. So we're 8 attorneys now. My firm administrator is actually an attorney, but she's not a lead counsel. She's doing a wonderful job as firm administrator, which again is interesting in terms of the culture that we have. So she came to us as a law clerk, and then she became an associate, and then she became a lead attorney, and enjoyed the work and did great. She's a brilliant lawyer, but needed to take a step back and try to reassess her work-life balance, her goals, what she wanted to do long term, and decided that litigation really wasn't her cup of tea. And so we worked out sort of a leave of absence for a while. We said, no, you are too smart and valuable to leave us forever. So just go and take a breather and keep talking to us. And we kept talking, and a position opened up as a firm administrator, and we worked it out that she took the position, which was, not what any one of us had envisioned, but it's a place where we like to work towards people's strengths. And we're not so focused on, labels or titles or identities, but what are you good at? And how can we use that strength to benefit the firm?
That's awesome. Finding the right seats for the right people. So that's all of that. So what's it like? I mean, you had to learn how to build a firm, learn how to operate a firm, learn all the business, learn all that stuff. And now you've got these multiple offices, all these people. And I think, you still actively litigate and try cases, right?
I sure do. Do. It's very challenging.
Yeah. How do you do all of that?
That's a good question. Well, I have the smallest docket of any of the other lawyers, so that's one piece of it. I try to hire people smarter and better than I am, who are really good at their jobs. I work with our systems. We do, we have a fantastic intake department that was not my idea, that was somebody else's idea, but we've grown it and nurtured it and developed it. So we automate all of that. We have a wonderful, electronic case management system. And I shouldn't maybe tell my opposing counsel this, but we've just onboarded a new AI system. So we're using artificial intelligence to help us with our drafting and some of our legal analysis. And it is going to be a game changer. It is really cool technology.
I'll tell you, I have just recently gone down the AI rabbit hole. If for a while, I mean, I'd played with it for the last couple of years. I'm like, it's cool, it does some cool stuff. But I really felt like it was just Silicon Valley overhyping it like they did crypto or something just to try to get people to buy whatever. But in the last couple weeks, I've seen some stuff that has just blown me away. And I'm drinking the Kool-Aid now. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to rush into this as quickly as I can, because otherwise I'm going to be left behind. So,
do you remember when electronic discovery, was the topic of every CLE that you went on, and you had some old school attorneys that said, this is ridiculous. I just print everything out in a binder, and that's how I do my discovery. And then eventually we got to the point where the bar said, if you do not understand electronic discovery and what your obligations are, you're committing malpractice.
mm-hmm.
I think we are going to see in the next 5 to 10 years a similar bar position, because it is so far superior than any technology we've seen before. I mean, you can take, and we've done this, 10 deposition transcripts and load it up into your AI and say, find the inconsistencies in witness X testimony throughout these depositions. And 3 minutes later, it will give you a chart.
It's amazing.
That would have taken a first-year associate 3 days to do. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
it's amazing. I was talking to somebody this morning about it, and which I think is great for somebody like you, me, experienced attorneys. I think it's going to be a problem for the new attorneys. They're not going to get. I think it's going to be hard to train them.
I 100% agree, which is why we've really been refocusing our efforts on internal training. So we did a mock trial this year with everybody at the firm. It was such a blast. So we had our non-lawyers, our intake specialists, our client services people, the back office folks act as our jurors. And then one of my partners was the judge. And then we split up teams into, plaintiff and defendant. We had a case file that was an employment discrimination file. And then our paralegals were the witnesses, paralegals and legal assistants. And we did a whole trial. And it was fascinating and great experience. And I was so impressed by the new lawyers, but they don't get much court time like you and I did. And they still did a wonderful job. But
That is
I
so
think
cool. That
it
is
was
so
great. We're
cool.
going to do it every year. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that is
Um,
awesome.
I will tell you that we didn't get to a full verdict because we didn't have enough time. Next year, we're going to do 2 days. We only did 1 day, but we polled our jury, afterwards. And I was on the plaintiff side and we thought we crushed it. And they're like, I don't know. I kind of could see why she got fired. I thought, oh my God, you work for a plaintiff's law firm.
That's hilarious. That's awesome. So, so we don't have that much time left, but there's so much I want to touch, but I do want to hit this. So, because I'm always fascinated when a firm grows beyond one office, and it's probably challenging to open a second office in the same state. But then when you go across state lines, the challenge goes up a lot. So what was that like for you crossing out of North Carolina to open your South Carolina office?
So one of my good friends, Wayne Outen of Outen and Golden, advised me many years ago to not follow the geography, but follow the people. And so if you find a lawyer that you fall in love with and is the right cultural fit, onboard that lawyer and figure it out. So our attorney, Tori Kepis, is in Charleston. We were recruiting. We wanted to look at South Carolina. We're in Charlotte. We're already in Charlotte, and then it's, very close border, and we get a lot of crossover. And she's licensed in both states. And she just, worked with the firm and had great ideas and was, the right cultural fit. And we said, let's do it. So it's been, from an accounting standpoint, not great, but that's not my job. So, I can outsource that. But managing the office has not been difficult, again, because we're remote. We always have been. So we do 4 town halls a year, 2 virtually and 2 in person. And so that allows us to have a cadence of regular contact with our attorneys. We do 2 attorney meetings a month where every attorney is on a, Zoom call. So we have a lot of FaceTime. There are occasions where, she has to come up for a hearing in North Carolina or we go down, but it's been remarkably easy, to be honest, to manage it, again, because I see her not much less frequently than I see my Raleigh attorneys, because we're in the office maybe once or twice a week.
I do like that. Follow the people, not the geography. I like that. That's another good one. You're dropping some gold. So I've got sort of 2 main questions left. So the first one I like to ask everybody, you've seen a lot. You've been doing this. You've had great success growing your firm. You've made mistakes, all the stuff. To the younger lawyers out there that maybe have just started a firm or are thinking about it, do you have any pieces of advice?
Yes. So much of which are already talked about, but one is really be yourself. You don't have to be me to start a firm. In fact, I don't recommend it. Be who you are and what your strengths are. No, spend a lot of time on that kind of self-exploration, self-awareness, because then you can really harness your strengths and you can delegate those things that you're not great at, because everyone has something they're not great at. And then be very transparent and authentic about it. So I am time challenged. I'm not great at getting to meetings on time. I think that's a pretty common entrepreneurial problem. It's not great. Nobody loves that. But I tell people that right up front when they start working with me. I say, look, here's my issue, that if this is a thing for you, if you're a stickler about that, you don't want to be on my team. That's going to really annoy you. So let's like move you over to somebody else who's really good at that stuff. That's not my strong suit. I'm not great at, forms and sort of like paperwork for the purpose of paperwork, but some of that needs to be done in a firm. So let's delegate that out. But that comes from a lot of time of really, look, if I could give one thing to every employee in the world that would probably put me out of business, is that everyone have a personal therapist, because you can't separate those things that you struggle with at home from what you're struggling with at work. So you just can't. So if you have, insecurities, if you have aggression, if you have anger management issues at home, that's going to show up in the workplace. You can't separate your soul when you are, it's not like severance. You can't go in and forget about who you were entirely. So really being your authentic self and embracing that is, I think, the key to your success.
That's so important. Okay, so last question. We talked about this a little bit in Nashville, but I want to explore it a little bit more. But, you're looking out in the future now. What's your vision? You're the biggest firm in North Carolina for your practice area. You've ventured into South Carolina. As you look forward, what are you going to do over the next decade?
Decade, that's generous given my age. But, I want to continue to expand, but not for the purpose of expansion alone. I want it to be for a strategic reason, which is I want more people to understand, particularly in the Southeast, the challenges they have with the kind of legal landscape that we have set up. Employees, most of the public still thinks that your employer has an obligation to treat you fairly. They do not. That is not required under the law. They do not have to treat you fairly. They just can't treat you illegally under certain kind of very rare exceptions. And I want a platform where I can empower more employees to understand, their rights and their ways to navigate a very challenging employment environment. I want to do that through more lawyers, more offices, of course, but also through, just more education, more public awareness, more advocacy. I'd like to see some laws changed or even introduced. For instance, in North Carolina, we don't have a state anti-discrimination, anti-harassment law. We have a wrongful termination common law, but we don't have an anti-harassment law. So sexual harassment is not against the law in North Carolina under North Carolina state law. So these are the kind of things that I think about that I would like to do. I'd love to have more clinics in law schools that emphasize, first of all, practical skills so that people can get out and actually do the work of a lawyer. And second of all, employment law, obviously. So we have a lot of goals still to look forward to.
You got to have goals. It keeps you getting up in the morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Laura, this has been fun, and I mean, I've got a ton more to ask you, but I want to be respectful of your time. But for those out there that want to get in touch with you, maybe again, you said you follow the people, not the geography. So if anybody's interested in learning more about your firm or how you built it, what's the best way for them to find you?
Absolutely. So we are at thenoblelaw.com. You can look up me, Laura Noble, in North Carolina. We're involved with NELA. We're involved with the North Carolina Advocates for Justice. We've done, I think, a pretty good job of our website, educating people about who we are and what we do. And I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura.
All right. Thank you. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.